Most people remember Don Knotts as the bug-eyed, jittery, yet lovable Deputy Barney Fife, a role that made America laugh and turned him into a household name. On screen, he was a master of comedic timing. But when the cameras stopped rolling, Don's life was a different story. Behind the laughter was a man fighting a devastating illness he was determined to hide from the world. And through it all, one person stood by his side, his fiercely loyal wife, Frances Yarborough, who became his anchor in the darkest chapter of his life. This is the heartbreaking story of Don Knotts' final days and the unwavering love of the woman who saw him through to the very end, before the 5 Emmy Awards and the sold-out movie premieres, long before he became one of the most recognizable faces on TV. Jesse Donald Knotts was a quiet boy from Morgantown, West Virginia. Born on July 21, 1924, his childhood was anything but easy. His family life was filled with hardship and fear. His father, a farmer who had lost his land, battled both alcoholism and schizophrenia. The home was tense, and a young, sensitive Don was sometimes terrorized by his father's knife-wielding rages. That terrifying environment forced Don to turn inward at a very young age, just to escape the chaos around him. His mother, Elsie, did her best to hold things together, running a boarding house to make ends meet after his father's health failed. But the scars of his childhood ran deep. Don later admitted he felt like a loser for most of his youth, a deep sadness that would follow him for years. Tragedy struck again when Don was a teenager. His older brother, Earl, nicknamed Shadow for his thinness and a source of comedic inspiration for Don, died from asthma. This loss, followed by his father's death from pneumonia when Don was only 13, left a permanent mark on him. It was in the middle of all this pain and anxiety that Don found his only real escape, comedy. He found comfort in radio comedies and started performing as a ventriloquist at church and school events. With his homemade dummy, Danny, he found a voice and a way to channel his anxieties into something that made other people happy. It was more than a hobby, it was how he survived. Each laugh he got was a small victory against the darkness of his early years. This was the beginning of a lifelong pattern, turning his private pain into public laughter. After a short, failed attempt to make it as a comedian in New York City, he came back home and enrolled at West Virginia University. His education was put on hold by World War II, when he enlisted in the U.S. Army. But even in the service, his path was clear. He spent most of his time entertaining troops in the Pacific with a GI variety show called Stars and Gripes. It was during this time that he reportedly got tired of ventriloquism and, in a symbolic move, lost his dummy Danny in the Pacific Ocean, deciding to rely on his own comedic talent. After the war, he returned to West Virginia, finished his degree in education, and married his college sweetheart, Catherine Metz, in 1947. With a degree and a new wife, he moved back to New York, this time determined to make his mark. Don honed his craft in New York, appearing on the radio and eventually landing a role on the soap opera Search for Tomorrow from 1953 to 1955. But his big break came when he joined Steve Allen's variety show. This is where he perfected his iconic, nervous man character in mock Man in the Street interviews, a character born from his own anxieties. Audiences howled with laughter as this shaky, flustered man claimed to be a surgeon or an explosives expert. In 1955, his career took another huge step forward when he was cast in the Broadway play, No Time for Sergeants. It was on that stage that he first worked with another rising star, a charismatic actor from North Carolina named Andy Griffith. The two hit it off right away, sharing a similar Southern background and a love for storytelling. They would spend their downtime playing Mumblety Peg, a schoolyard game from their youth, and built a bond that would define both of their careers. When the play was made into a movie in 1958, their on-screen chemistry was obvious. 2 years later, in 1960, Don was playing cards with friends when he saw the pilot for a new sitcom starring his old pal. He picked up the phone and made a call that would change TV history. "Listen," he said to Andy, "don't you think Sheriff Andy Taylor ought to have a deputy?" And just like that, Deputy Barney Fife was born. At first, the show was supposed to focus on Andy's comedy, with Don playing the straight man. But it quickly became clear the dynamic worked better the other way around. Andy graciously stepped into the role of the calm, steady center, letting Don's chaotic, neurotic energy as Barney steal the show. For 5 seasons, Don Knotts was the heart of Mayberry's humor. He was the overeager, insecure, and completely lovable deputy who was only allowed to carry one bullet, which he had to keep in his shirt pocket. He poured all of his own insecurities into the character, making Barney Fife more than just a caricature. He was a deeply human and relatable person. His performance was a masterclass in physical comedy, earning him an incredible 5 Emmy Awards. The Andy Griffith Show was a hit, but Don, believing the show would end after 5 seasons as Andy had originally planned, started looking into a film career. He made the tough choice to leave the show in 1965 to star in movies for Universal Pictures. Though he would come back for guest spots that earned him 2 more Emmys, his departure marked the end of an era. He made a successful move to the big screen, starring in beloved family comedies like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken and The Incredible Mr. Limpet. His unique style of comedy clicked with audiences, and his films were box office hits. He later returned to TV in 1979, joining the cast of the sitcom Three's Company as the quirky landlord, Mr. Furley, introducing his comedic genius to a new generation. For decades, Don Knotts was a fixture on America's screens, a reliable source of joy. His public image was one of perfect comedic timing. But behind the scenes, the man who brought so much happiness to others was wrestling with his own demons. Off-screen, Don Knotts' life was a mix of love, commitment, and quiet struggle. His first marriage to Catherine Metz, which began in 1947, gave him 2 children, a daughter, Karen, and a son, Thomas. After their divorce in 1964, Don became a single dad to his daughter, a role he took very seriously. Karen, who later became an actress and comedian, remembers her father as supportive and loving, but in his own quiet way. He was an internal, thoughtful man who preferred connecting through stories and conversation rather than outdoor activities. In 1974, Don married his second wife, Laura Lee Chuckna. This period of his life was filled with professional success, but also a deepening internal battle. Friends and family noticed his ongoing struggle with depression. His daughter Karen said he wrestled with it fiercely, describing his moods as volatile and prone to spirals of negative thinking. The pressures of fame, on top of his lifelong anxieties, reportedly strained his marriage to Laura Lee, and the couple divorced in 1983. Throughout these years, Don also dealt with another major health issue, hypochondria. This wasn't a joke, it was a real and often debilitating condition that left him convinced he had all sorts of mysterious illnesses. It was another symptom of the anxiety that had been with him since he was a child. Beyond his marriages, the most important relationship in his professional life was his friendship with Andy Griffith. They were more than co-stars, they were like brothers. Their bond was formed on the intense TV set and lasted long after they stopped working together. They understood each other in a way few others could, as both had risen from humble Southern beginnings to the heights of Hollywood. Their friendship was a source of strength for both men, a constant in the fickle world of show business. Even when they lost touch for a while, their connection was unbreakable. Andy would later prove his loyalty by giving Don a recurring part on his show, Matlock, when Don's work had slowed down, but even this strong friendship had its issues. According to Daniel DeVice, Don's brother-in-law and biographer, there were moments of professional jealousy. Don, despite his 5 Emmys, sometimes felt overshadowed by Andy, the show's namesake and creative leader. But these were small issues in a friendship built on deep affection and respect. This complicated web of relationships, his love for his children, his struggles in marriage, and his profound bond with Andy Griffith, shaped the man who would face his greatest challenges in his later years, and find his most steadfast supporter in a new, final love. In the late 1980s, nearly 2 Decades before his final chapter began, Don Knotts' life took another unexpected turn. While working on a sitcom called What a Country, he met an actress and production assistant named Frances Yarborough. Frances, then in her 40s, was hired mainly to help Don, who was in his 60s, learn his lines. Despite the age gap, they felt an immediate and undeniable connection. Frances, who was also involved in improvisational comedy, was drawn to what she called Don's vulnerability. "My first impression of him was that he seemed very helpless," she later said. He had never met someone so vulnerable before. For Don, who had spent his life building a comedic shield to protect his sensitive side, this was a big deal. Frances saw past the celebrity and the characters to the real man. Don, in turn, was charmed by her energy and her stories about her own quirky family. Their relationship grew over meals at La Scala in Beverly Hills, where they would share stories and make each other laugh. It was a romance built on quiet companionship and a shared sense of humor. Within months, Frances moved into Don's condo in Century City, and they were rarely apart. Friends noticed a change in Don. Before Frances, he had been living a nocturnal life, drinking too much, and using medication to sleep. He was also a chain smoker. Shortly after they got together, he quit smoking cold turkey, a change Frances believed was thanks to the stability she brought to his life. They were kindred spirits. Both were described as shy and a bit insecure in social settings, finding comfort and confidence in each other. Their bond was tender and private, a world away from the Hollywood spotlight. After many years together, they finally married in 2002. The quiet ceremony was more about sealing their companionship than making a public statement. Don, having been married twice before, seemed to have finally found someone who truly understood him. Frances became a stepmother to Don's two adult children, Karen and Thomas, and fit right into the family. She wasn't just his wife, she was his partner in every sense. She was his confidant, his support system, and the person who would stand by him as he entered the most difficult time of his life. Their quiet, loving partnership would soon be tested in ways they could never have foreseen, as a secret battle began to take shape behind closed doors. As Don Knotts got older, he faced a new and terrifying challenge, one that threatened the very tools of his trade, his eyesight. He was diagnosed with macular degeneration, a progressive eye disease that blurs central vision, making it hard to read, drive, or even see faces. For an actor who relied so much on facial expressions and visual cues, the diagnosis was crushing. He became depressed for a while, wrestling with the fear of losing his independence and his career. But in a moment of typical resilience, he told himself, "I bet a blind person would give his right arm to have the vision I have." He refused to give up, continuing to work and even swim laps, his favorite exercise, though he could no longer drive or easily read scripts. This struggle with his vision, however, was soon dwarfed by a much deadlier threat. In the early 2000s, despite having quit smoking years earlier, Don was diagnosed with lung cancer. This was a battle he chose to fight almost completely in secret. He told very few people how sick he was, not even his children or his closest friends, including Andy Griffith. He was from a generation that valued stoicism, and he wanted to protect his loved ones from worry. But there was another reason for his secrecy: he didn't want to be seen as a sick actor. He knew that if the news got out, the work he loved so much might dry up. The last years of his life became an incredible act of deception, born out of love and professional pride. He went to great lengths to hide his failing health. When he needed an oxygen tank to breathe, he would hide it from visitors. He started canceling visits from friends, giving vague excuses. He turned down a Christmas visit from Andy Griffith, claiming it wasn't a good time, when the real reason was his embarrassment over needing oxygen. Andy, having noticed how labored Don's breathing was during a dinner, later called Frances, sensing something was seriously wrong. Through all of this, Frances Yarborough was his silent partner in the secret and his unwavering rock. She was one of the only people who knew just how sick he was. She managed his appointments, supported his decision to keep it private, and gave him the emotional strength he needed to keep going. She became his gatekeeper, his nurse, and his most trusted ally in a lonely fight. Despite his private struggle, Don kept working. He voiced the character of Mayor Turkey Lurkey in the Disney film Chicken Little, released in November 2005, and made guest appearances on shows like That 70s Show. He was projecting an image of health to the world, even as his body was failing him. The man who had spent a lifetime channeling his anxiety into performance was now using that same skill to mask a much deeper pain. It was a final, tragic performance, with an audience of only one, his devoted wife, Frances, who watched with a heavy heart as the comedy legend she loved fought to control the final story of his life. By early 2006, the strong front Don Knotts had maintained began to fail. The lung cancer had progressed, leading to severe respiratory problems and pneumonia. He was admitted to UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, but even then, he tried to downplay how serious his condition was. The secret he had guarded for so long could no longer be kept. His final days were a strange and poignant mix of sadness and humor. True to his nature, Don never lost his comedic spirit. His daughter, Karen, recalls that even from his hospital bed, her father was cracking jokes and telling stories, trying to make his family laugh right up until the very end. In one now famous story, he said or did something so funny that Karen and Frances burst into uncontrollable laughter. Feeling overwhelmed and thinking it was wrong to be laughing in the face of death, Karen ran out of the room to compose herself. It was a moment she would later regret. A director friend told her, "You should have stayed and laughed out loud. That's what comedians live for." It was a powerful realization. For Don Knotts, the sound of laughter was the ultimate proof of a life well lived. Even as that life was ending, during this incredibly difficult time, his oldest friend, Andy Griffith, learned how sick he was and rushed to his side. The two men, who had defined a generation of television comedy, shared one last, heartbreaking reunion. Andy sat by Don's bedside, holding his hand and offering words of encouragement. He leaned in close and whispered, "Jess, breathe. You've got to make this, you've got to pull through. Breathe." He used Don's birth name, Jesse. A name Don never liked but allowed only his closest friends to use, as a final, intimate gesture of their deep bond. Don, unable to speak, reportedly moved his shoulder, a small sign that he had heard his friend. The medical treatments ultimately didn't work. When it became clear there was nothing more the doctors could do, Don expressed his wish not to be kept alive by machines. The decision was made for him to go home. During the ambulance ride, he suffered a cardiac arrest. Paramedics managed to revive him, giving his family a few more precious moments with him. Back in the hospital, in those final, fleeting hours, the room was filled with an atmosphere that perfectly captured Don's life, a delicate balance of deep sadness and resilient humor. The man who made America laugh was getting ready to take his final bow, surrounded by the love of those who knew the real man behind the characters. And at the center of it all was his wife, Frances, holding his hand, her heart breaking, but providing a steady, calming presence in the storm. In the harrowing final chapter of Don Knotts' life, Frances Yarborough became more than a wife. She was his guardian, his shield, and his greatest source of comfort. As Don's health failed, she was the one who managed the complex dance of his medical care while also honoring his desperate wish for privacy. She was the steady hand on his shoulder and the calm voice in his ear, navigating the terrifying reality of terminal illness with quiet strength and total devotion. Frances was there for every hard conversation, every painful treatment, and every moment of fear. She was in the ambulance when Don's heart stopped and was revived, a traumatic experience she endured with him. She sat with him in the quiet hospital room, holding his hand as he fought for every breath. She shared in the bittersweet laughter his jokes created, finding moments of light in the darkness. Her presence was a constant promise that he would not face the end alone. She understood him in a way that few others could. She knew his insistence on secrecy wasn't about pushing people away, but about protecting them and saving the identity he had worked his whole life to build. He didn't want pity, he wanted to be remembered as the man who made people laugh, not as a man who gave up. Francis respected that, becoming the keeper of his secret and his dignity. After he passed away on February 24, 2006, it was Francis who explained the heart of his genius to the world. In a statement filled with love and understanding, she said, "He saw poignancy in people's pride and pain, and he turned it into something endearing and hilarious." It was the perfect tribute, capturing not only his comedic legacy but also the deep empathy that fueled his work, an empathy born from his own life of struggle. In his will, Don left his estate, valued in the millions, to Francis. It was a final testament to their partnership and her central role in his life. After his death, Francis largely stayed out of the public eye, her mission to care for her husband complete. She had been his anchor in the storm, the quiet force that allowed a comedy legend to face his final curtain call with as much grace, dignity, and even humor as he could. Their love story wasn't one of grand, public gestures, but of quiet, steadfast devotion in the face of life's greatest trial, a love that provided comfort and strength until the very end. Don Knotts brought laughter to millions, creating characters that have truly stood the test of time. His story, and the love he shared with Francis, is a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit. What is your favorite Don Knotts memory or character? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story moving, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about Hollywood's most iconic figures. Don Knotts died on February 24, 2006, at the age of 81, with Francis and his children by his side. The cause was complications from lung cancer. He was buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, his final resting place marked by a bronze plaque showing his most beloved roles, a permanent tribute to the joy he gave the world. He leaves behind two legacies. There is the public legacy of Barney Fife, Mr. Furley, and a host of other unforgettable characters. He was a comedic pioneer, a master of physical comedy whose influence you can see in generations of performers who came after him, from Jim Carrey to Martin Short. As one TV writer put it, he was the most beloved person in all of show business. But there is also the private legacy, a story of incredible resilience. It's the story of a boy who overcame a traumatic childhood and turned his deep-seated anxiety into a celebrated art form. He was a man who battled depression, hypochondria, and a debilitating illness, all while presenting a public face of effortless charm and humor, and at the heart of his final chapter is a quiet love story. The story of Don Knotts and Frances Yarborough isn't one of Hollywood glamour, but of profound, human connection. It's the story of a woman who saw the vulnerable man behind the famous face and loved him for it. She gave him the stability and support to face his deepest fears and to leave this world on his own terms, still hearing the echo of laughter. In the end, the jittery, nervous man who made America laugh found his calm center in the unwavering love of his wife.